All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first welcome you all to the CPS Board of Education Health and Safety Committee meeting for March the 20th, 2023. I'm going to go ahead and get started with a quick roll call. So we have Board Member Jones.
Here.
And next we have Board Member Morosky.
Here.
And then, of course, you have myself, Mary Weinberg, Board Member Weinberg, the Chair for Health and Safety. I'm going to also start off by introducing our administration that is here with us today. And then we also have two speakers that aren't quite here yet, but they will be getting here shortly. And I'm going to go ahead and start with, to my left, we have Chief of Staff, Dr. Derek Little. And we're going to go ahead and give him a round of applause because we're going to welcome him to Health and Safety today. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We hope that you enjoy your time with us today. Our presenters that will be walking in here shortly will be, of course, we have Lieutenant Shantia Miller with the Cincinnati Police Department Youth Services. And we are also supposed to have Officer Eddie Hawkins with the Cincinnati Police Youth Services as well. So once they arrive, we will give them a round of applause too. So we have a nice agenda today that is not only going to allow us to move forward in the district in regards to health and safety, but our topics that we're going to talk about today will include lockdown drills, in-school safety, student conduct and discipline, some of the data that stems from that, and then we're also going to be talking about bullying, and we're going to go over our work plan in which we already approved, but I wanted to make sure that everyone had a copy, a nice, pretty copy, so that if anyone had any questions, they could feel free to ask. So as a reminder, for those of you who have tuned in virtually, the documents that you will be reviewing are going to be available, of course, on Board Docs, and we will also be sharing them on the screen during this meeting. For members of the public who wish to speak, you may do so by clicking the chat button. The feature will be open for 3 minutes. Please submit your name, your affiliation, and your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you would like a direct response back to any questions that you may have. So I feel like we'll take a little breather here because I thought my guests would have walked in through the door like magic, like boom, you know, like how you snap your fingers and they're like there.
I have a thought.
Oh, okay, let's go with your thought as I get my eyelash out of my eye.
Since the work plan is already approved, can we just address that? And
you know
maybe
what? You're amazing.
Thank you.
I
think so too.
You know what? That's a great idea. So let's go ahead and pull that up. With our Health and Safety Committee, as you can see on the screen, this is our work plan that the committee went over. And I just want to thank my committee members for not only working on this with me, but also with the administration. We look forward to the rest of the year for talking about the specific topics. So as you can see here on the Health and Safety, it lists the committee members. It also lists when we're going to meet. So obviously we did January the 23rd. We are doing March the 20th. We're going to be doing June the 26th and then September the 18th with a planning meeting on December the 11th. We also have the responsibilities of the Health and Safety Committee listed below, in which it tells us the specific responsibilities of what this committee will do and what we will follow. Then we decided to include the Cincinnati Board of Education goals and guardrails as well, because I think that's very important as we're moving forward. And we will eventually add our strategic plan, and if any of those things apply, we'll definitely add it to this. If you look below, it has the calendar of the specific topics that we will be discussing. So in January, we will have mental health, sexual abuse, discrimination, harassment, violence, and orientation, and SROs. And in March, we're going to be talking about, obviously, student conduct, discipline data, in-school safety and lockdown, and bullying. And then in June, we will hit up and talk about student conduct and discipline data again, safety in nutrition, physical health, in terms of vision and dental, and then we'll also talk about child abuse. And in September, we will come with athletics and extracurriculars, physical and mental safety, pedestrian safety, menstrual health, gun safety, and then in December is our planning meeting. So, welcome, Lieutenant. Welcome, Officer. So I'm going to do a reintroduction of you guys. Thanks so much for being here. So we have here today Lieutenant Shantia Miller with the CPD Youth Services, And we also have Officer Eddie Hawkins with CPDU Services. So let's give them a round of applause. And you're going to come to the mic. Come on up to the mic right there. So you're going to have to press the little button to turn it to make it turn on to red. And for those of you tuning in, I had asked for Lieutenant Miller to come to talk about lockdown drills. And after she presents a little bit on her perspective of what an SRO does as it pertains to lockdown drills, we'll open it up for questions. And then we will also have our wonderful Dr. Little then start with his presentation.
All right, so thank you. Thank you all
You're
for your
welcome.
patience. I had a citizen stop me en route here, and I'm not at liberty to say I have a meeting, so I had to assist her.
That is understandable.
All right, regarding our lockdown drills, so if you don't know, ALICE, which is what we use for lockdown, it came as a result of a school shooting. And so ALICE, which is what we use, it stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And so after doing several studies on active shooters, they found that you have more survivors when the public responded to the active shooter. And so it was no longer like running and hiding and only fighting when you were approached. It was being prepared to actually attack the offender should they enter the room. And so what happens in the CPS schools is that they get 3 lockdown drills a year. The kids are, all the administrators and the teachers are taught about the ALICE drill and training, and it's announced over the PA, and all the kids basically train for the drill. We do know that some people are uncomfortable hearing that we're telling children to throw things and attack an offender, but based on studies, they're less likely to shoot and to continue shooting when they're distracted. In addition, classrooms that are barricaded and locked, they also are least likely to be attacked. And so ALICE does recommend different things and different items to keep doors blocked and different strategies should the offender enter the room. Has anybody here ever been through ALICE training? Yes, okay.
The form you have in front of you is the form we use to evaluate.
And just make sure you speak closer to the mic so we can
right.
hear you.
So the form you have in front of you is the form we use to grade the schools on their lockdown drills. As you can see, it's usually a pass or fail because in life, everything is not a definite. However, if there are some classrooms that did not perform the drill appropriately or did not go through the things that they've been shown, it would be a fail for the entire school. Because for us, if we lose any life, to us, we were not successful. That's just how we are. That's how we believe. You flip to the second page, it kind of gives you an insight on different types of lockdown. If you've known, we've had some incidents where there have been incidents around the schools. So sometimes when there are incidents around the schools, there's a different type of lockdown. It's called a lock-in. And what we do is we secure the building and we won't let anyone in or out. That's if there's something going on around the school. That means business can continue on as it should in the school. However, we don't allow one in or out. That's traditionally when we have an incident that's happening around the school. Now, sometimes some schools will get a little frail if they think they're closer to an incident, but we're pretty good in judging whether or not an incident has occurred in the schools. Some students do get a little frailed about this, and some principals want us to give early indication that, hey, we're going to have a lockdown drill tomorrow. However, that's just not realistic. We want young people to go through the process of having to go through the drill. So sometimes when you say, hey, we're going to have a drill tomorrow about ALICE, young people sort of don't take it serious. For us, we're more or less apt to want young people to take all drills serious, just like you would a fire drill, just like we would a tornado drill. So we're really just making sure that the principals and the staff members know that this is something that should be taken serious. We've had some incidents that have occurred near here. As you remember, the incident that happened out at Princeton High School was a wake-up call for all of us. I think everybody had to go back and really start to rethink how we seriously took drills because parents and students were very upset at how things went through, the process of how things moved and shaped. And since that incident, we've had a lot more attentiveness and a lot more purposeful when we're going through these drills.
I have a quick question, and very good point that you brought up. I actually was going to ask about a checklist, so you read my mind. Thank you. From an SRO perspective, how have you been finding the students' behaviors or attentiveness during these lockdown drills? Do they take it seriously? Do you feel like that has either been a concern or issue?
No, they don't take it seriously. But, this generation has been through a lot. So
Right.
the fact that they have experienced so much trauma, there are different ways that they deal with it. My hope is that they do retain the information that we're giving to them. And if we have to give some corrective measures during the drill, that the next time we run the drill, that they're a little bit more attentive.
And I'm gonna say, so as a commander, I don't conduct them. I sat in on 2 this year, and the high school students were the ones who were least cooperative. The middle schoolers, they pretty much had it together and they were quiet. And obviously, we don't have kindergartners and elementary students do a counterattack. We do just have them locked down, and they're generally quiet. Elementary students do not do a counter drill, so we just look to make sure if they're quiet. We don't look for smaller elementary students to attack or counter an offender.
I'm going to open it up to see if any of my colleagues have any questions. Board Member Jones.
We adopted, Alice, I want to say, we may be coming on about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years. Because Columbine, so Columbine happened, and then Sandy Hook occurred, and then everyone decided that, hey, we need to do a little bit more. Sandy Hook was really the incident that catapulted and made everyone stand up and says, you know what, we might want to do things different. And that was simply because of what the principal did in Sandy Hook. The principal was the one who actually approached the gunman, and they said she gave her life, but she saved multiple children.
So, and this question is probably more appropriate for our administration.
Your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. As they're talking about how we prep students, well, we don't really prep them because it's supposed to be spontaneous.
Absolutely.
Because incidents just occur.
Absolutely.
They don't call and say we're getting ready to come into school. But there can be some prep in terms of helping families understand that these lockdown drills will occur. And how do we provide that information to families so that they can talk to their kids at home and get them prepared for it? Or even in the schools, are there opportunities in the schools where teachers can talk to kids about it? So that and my belief is we need to talk to them constantly about it so that they don't forget. And it's more likely they'll be less afraid, the more they do it. It's kind of like fire drills, You've been a student for so many years, you understand you have to have a fire drill and you're not as frightened about it. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say the drill is where we test readiness. So teachers in schools definitely go through preparation before that, even if the drill isn't announced. You know that you're teaching a classroom, how do you hunker down and be quiet, or what are you going to use in the moment where you have to counter. So that is explicitly talked about with students in an ongoing way throughout the school year. And the drill sees how well folks have prepared to be ready for those instances. And then once these occur, we do communicate out with families that a drill occurred. That happens at the school level in most instances, like for a fire drill or a planned lockdown drill. If there is something Officer Hawkins mentioned, there could be something in the neighborhood causing a school to go either on lockdown or lock in, and we typically communicate that to families directly at the district level.
Okay. And then
Go ahead.
my last
Mhm.
question.
No, you're fine.
In the lock-in prep, in the lock-in situation, so the students, so the schools, they just lock the doors, right? Are there any type of internal protocols for being in a space, or, are they free to roam around and stuff like that?
So school traditionally carries on as scheduled. However, security personnel mind coming in the door. So school does continue on normally on a lock-in, but school personnel, security personnel, and administrative staff sort of monitor the perimeter to make sure.
And that's the lock-in, meaning like if a shooting, a bank robbery or something happened near a school, but on the lock-down, every classroom, all the doors are locked, every classroom door is locked. Instruction is stopped while we conduct the drill because it's supposed to be as if an actual event was occurring. And so instruction and everything stops.
Right. Good questions. Anything from Board Member Morosky?
Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Doc, for being here too to answer questions. So I think I have a question for both groups. I could be wrong, but you were for the pre-K and through 6 or is it 6? I guess they don't do the counter, so it's just the ALIE or
Correct. They don't do the counter.
Okay, good. I don't know a lot of people know that. So I appreciate that and knowing that, and I can pass that along. And then another question, probably for you, Doc Little. In the classroom, we talked about this a while ago. I remember I was all hot and bothered about this like 4 years ago. It was the first policy meeting before the COVID lockdown, so January of 2020. We were talking about sort of your point about the follow-up. Mm-hmm. We were talking about in the actual classroom, is there any procedure from the administrative level that a teacher, at least for, again, these younger kids, and I would say for the older ones too, but especially for the younger ones, any kind of procedure in place where the teacher has to like walk through with the kids? Because I understand the wisdom between not giving a heads up. It took me a couple of years, I think, but I get that.
So
I do. Yeah,
you all do that?
So if we have so I do want to say, we had the Scare Riverview East where we had to have SWAT sweep the building. And they went through in the younger classrooms and talked to the kids with their mask off and everything. After the scene was clear, they ended up in 3 classrooms where the teachers were kind of nervous about what impact that would have had. And they took their mask off, sat down and talked to the kids and just debriefed them on and it was a bad guy in the school. And, they ended up not being in the school and we had to catch them and we just had to search to keep you safe and stuff like that.
Okay.
So the onset of the school year, each SRO gets with when the principals have their meetings with all the staff, and we go in and give a presentation and take the staff through ALICE training.
Okay.
So at the onset of each school year, there's a slot slided for us to go in when they're doing their beginning of the school year meetings where we actually train the staff and field questions on what should be done. Because sometimes we have a lot of new staff that are coming some people have never even done ALICE.
Sure.
So that's every year.
Was you asking about the kids specifically? If one of the kids' rooms are startled or giving us some aftercare, that's all I can say we do. I'm not sure if you all.
Sure.
The only thing I would add to that is if we know that a classroom or a building is more sensitized to an event and needs some response, the security response team can also go out and do some of those conversations with classrooms, as well as some of our DSS teams. So if we need counselors or psychologists to go out for a particular incident, that support is provided as well.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Little, on that, because that was one of my concerns. As being a teacher, you're sitting down with young children and having to explain why this has happened, and some of them are frazzled, and some of them are upset, and some of them don't understand. And I think that we're not doing our due diligence if we're not able to explain to them and instead act like it's just another day moving on. So thank you for adding that. I want to thank you both for coming. Did you have anything to end with, or did you have anything else to add?
I do have one question. I don't know if it's related to this, but not directly, so it might be more appropriately addressed to Dr. Little. Little off the specific topic, but a while ago in health and safety, we talked a little bit about guns in schools, and it seems that there is a higher prevalence of guns being found or around the building, or kids bringing them into schools, that kind of thing. And I was wondering the safety precautions within the buildings. Are we You know, are we doing anything additional to what we have, like the detectors? Or we talked about that, but I don't know if there's been any movement on that. Go ahead.
While we're having more fights, and we just had the recent shooting that occurred where the student ran into the building, we are not getting any more or less guns in the schools. It's staying pretty consistent for us. Just so you know, it's not like we've seen an influx in guns. We've seen the influx in fights, but not in firearms. And traditionally, the guns are found outside of schools. They don't take them into schools because some of the kids walk through rough neighborhoods. Yeah, I think 3 of the ones were found outside of school, and I think we've gotten 2 off of kids this year. We've gotten 2 off of kids this year, and that's all we got last year as well, so far.
Well, thank you. You guys did great. It was a pleasure having you. You can feel free to stay with us as well to hear the other topics. And next up, we'll have Dr. Little to present.
And Member Jones, we got some data related
Thank
to your
you.
question in one of the slides
Oh, okay.
about possession of
Thanks.
firearms. All right, I think Rob's going to pull it up for us. Thank you, Rob. So we got 3 quick updates here. The first we'll do is related to bullying and efforts to stem bullying. We'll then go a bit deeper on in-school safety and then wrap up with some discipline data. So let's kick it off with the anti-bullying update. This data is shared with the board, I believe, each year overall in terms of bullying incidents in the district. What is shown in the chart is full year data except for this year, which is for the first semester only. So that very far right-hand column is just through the fall. What we can see, though, is if we take out the 2 main COVID years of 1920 and 2021, we're seeing overall reports of bullying go down, as well as the number of confirmed reports decrease. Even if we were to double what we saw in the fall for this spring, we would be less than where we were last year in terms of bullying reports. Our positive school culture team worked closely with schools to make sure that there are efforts in place to both talk about anti-bullying efforts and respond quickly in the case of a report. The next slide shows us what it looks like by level, and it's really hard actually to pick out a trend here. We think that bullying incidents look fairly proportional, elementary versus secondary, given the number of students in those types of buildings. What we do see, though, is we have slightly higher percentage of confirmed bullying reports at the elementary level compared to the high school level. And then finally, for this section, we just are calling out on the slide the actual bully button, which a couple meetings ago was shown on the screen. It is on the home page. You can also search it if needed, but anyone can actually submit a bully button incident. It can be the student who believes they're being bullied. It can be a caregiver, a community member, a teacher or a staff member in the school or at the district level. It is the way that we capture all of this data. So we want every suspected report of bullying to be captured here. Once that report is made within 24 business hours or 1 business day, an investigation ensues, and that is led at the school level. So the principal or AP, for the most part, leads that investigation, but we do have central staff who's available to support and consult on those if needed. That usually only happens in more complex cases of suspected bullying. And then once the investigation is over, again, most of the time it's unconfirmed bullying, but the principal actually goes back into the bully button form on the back end and closes that case out, which shows it to be resolved. The next section really goes back to where we started with our colleagues from CPD, which is around in-school safety, and we'll talk a bit more about lockdown so you see that data. To frame this section of the conversation, a couple things to make clear on the front end. At the beginning of the school year, this is pretty routine. All schools review and update their safety plans. In many ways, that is in partnership with the SRO on the campus. We have also multiple times this year reviewed crisis communications. So who do you call in the event something is going on, and how will communication both flow during a potential crisis event, but also after, back to families or back to the community to show resolution for that. We talked about lockdown drills a minute ago. Those drills do not count if the SRO is not present and signing off on that checklist that you saw a bit earlier. And then as we look at the data over the next couple slides, you will see that we are working to improve overall compliance and timeliness with drills, just making sure they're happening and making sure they're happening on time. So let's start with the first two. These are possibly the most basic. Fire drills have to occur. There are at least 6 required throughout the school year. 1 has to occur within the first 10 days of school. The rest just need to be spread out throughout the school year. So if all of our schools met that 6th requirement, we would have 390 by the end of the year. As of last week, we were sitting at 231. There's still obviously about 2 months of school left. So we're working with schools to finish those drills. The tornado drill number is really low right now, 7, but that requirement doesn't actually kick in until part of tornado season locally. So those drills aren't required really until April and May. So that number will start to climb pretty rapidly over the next 2 months. The next 2 are what we started the meeting with lockdown drills. We do require 3 throughout the school year. They do have time requirements ideally. So by the end of October, end of January, and end of April, you can see on the slide that overall this year we've had 125 so far. So schools continue to do those drills. Even if we miss one of those October or January deadlines, those can be made up and they get included in the total for the entire school year. The theoretical drill is a bit different. That can be some type of lockdown drill. It could also be a drill for if you have a chemical explosion or exposure both in the building or in the neighborhood. So these really just allow for different types of situations, and there's only one of those that is required throughout the year. So if we add all of these up, our schools are typically doing about 9 to 10 drills a year to meet all of their requirements across the different types. When we move beyond drills, though, we know there's a lot of things both about the building and in the building that matter. Let's go back one, Rob. The first, in health and safety, this has been talked about, is just what does access to buildings look like? So as we think about the number of doors across all of our schools, that's almost 1,500 opportunities to exit or enter a building. Our security assistants at each school have daily protocols that they follow to make sure that they walk the perimeter of a building. They're checking on doors, making sure other key safety equipment like alarms and cameras are functioning. That's also something we look at when our response team goes out and does audits of the schools, is to make sure that this is occurring. The top 5 schools in terms of number of doors is on the slide. To no surprise, that is our larger high schools that has a lot of opportunity to come and go from those buildings. The next, we're sort of hodgepodging it here today in terms of topics, but all of these relate more broadly to how we keep students safe in school. And AEDs are a part of that. So making sure that we can respond in the event that that's necessary. We have every school in the district has at least 1 AED total. We're at 185. Again, there's more at our larger schools with a higher population. And then the slide after this gives you a sense of how, maybe it's 2 slides away, but we have in here the number of people who've been trained on the AED since August of 2020. I will remind us, though we don't need it, that August of 2020 was right in the middle of COVID, so trainings took a bit of a different look. So our entire training plan will start to ramp up more aggressively now that we are back and have more access to folks. The other things that we're really focusing around training is not just basics, CPR first aid, which we'll continue to do, but expanding into the mental health space as well. Making sure that we have more folks in schools and in communities that are trained in mental health first aid, which helps people recognize when a student might be facing a mental health crisis and potentially needs a referral or intervention. So treating mental health and physical health on an equal plane as we move forward in terms of the training that we're providing. And then lastly, I think in this section, let's skip that one, Rob. That's the folks who've been trained. This goes back to your question, Member Jones, about how we are keeping schools safe and monitoring that. With our secondary schools, we obviously have walk-through metal detectors. There are almost 80 throughout all of our secondary schools. We have 2 at elementary schools. Those have been there for a while, and they were by principal request, but the vast majority of our elementary schools do not have walk-through metal detectors. And then we keep some in inventory to make sure that we have them available for replacement or repair as necessary. This does not count, though, potential wands that may be available if those are being used for special events or heightened security if there's a reason for that. The last piece in our update here relates to discipline, and we'll start by looking at overall discipline incidents. This is a bit of an opposite trend from what we see in bullying reports. We do have an increase in discipline incidents year over year, about 23% in fact. The chart on the left shows total, and for Black students in particular, the chart on the right is for all other student groups, but we can see across the board in general that these are up year over year. Now, in terms of what types of discipline we're seeing, we know that we've had a big focus this year around the ABCs, and behavior and culture are part of that. Those are really school-based. We have work to do in the coming year to create stronger systems across the district to help with this. But the vast majority of our issues do relate to fighting. You heard Lieutenant Miller mention that a few moments ago. But to your question, Member Jones, firearms only account for 4 out of all of the 22,000 incidents we've seen this year. So there certainly are neighborhood factors that play, but interior of the school, it's really a safe place. Thus, the student actually returning after he was injured to find safety and support. So that hasn't been as big of an issue. It's really helping students understand, how do I approach conflict in a different way? How do I think through this moment of intensity in a different way? And that relates to the last thing I'll say before wrapping up the presentation is what we're going to focus on moving forward on the next slide, Rob, which is really helping build capacity not only of our students, but of our school teams to build more executive function and response strategies. That relates to work that we're going to dig deep into and expand related to restorative practices. It continues to combine and integrate work that's already underway related to SEL, trauma-informed practices, and our PBIS approaches with discipline. All of that will be more reflected in the updated code of conduct that the board will consider later this spring. And then continuing to work with our community partners to better understand and address issues that students are facing in their life outside of school. What's happening in the neighborhood and what's happening in the streets surrounding our school communities is certainly important for us to get a better handle on, and ensuring more students have access to mental health services as needed. All of those things can better address both bullying, in-school safety, and reduce discipline incidents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Little. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues first, then I will have some questions and some comments for you. Board Member Jones.
Just one question around the mental health first aid, which I happen to fully support. Having been, when I was working in mental health, one of the people who, when it came to Cincinnati, helped implement it across our system. So very, very strong program. My question is, how is there an opportunity as part of professional development for staff to become certified as mental health first aid certifications? That's what I want to say.
That is exactly where we're going. We have started some trainings this year, more predominantly with social workers and some counselors, but what we're actually looking to do is ensure that the district has trained the trainers throughout our buildings. Great. So that all staff can be trained without us having to go outside of CPS to actually get that Wonderful. Expertise.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Jones. Board Member Morosky.
I was going to call that out, but I'll just call out, I like the idea too of refocusing the student code of conduct as kind of this support guide idea. I mean, obviously there's things you have to have, this will happen, this is some making it something that's useful for families. Another thing that, as folks who have been with me for a while know, I can't help but call out, it's always disheartening to see that we, like everybody, disproportionately punish our Black children, and likely if we were to break that down, it'd be young Black men I know that you have spent your career working on that issue, which is one of the reasons I'm happy personally. If I point a personal privilege, say I'm happy that you're here. In your opinion, what are we doing well to try to combat that? And I know with again, refocusing the student guide, I think is part. I think what you just said is part. I think what our friends from CPD are talking about is all part, and working on our relationship with CPD. How are we working with SROs, with our students? All of this is part of it. What would you add, or what in your professional, for those who don't know, Dr. Little spent a career on these issues. In your professional opinion, what are we doing that is positive to try to reverse this trend?
I would echo everything you said. I think these relationships and thinking about this as a matrix of support and response for students is absolutely critical. There's a lot of community organizations that I've already gotten the good pleasure to meet that I think are key here. Because again, as we well know, a student walks into the building with their whole life with them. And so there's things that we're working to do in schools, and more of that conversation will even happen tonight at the board meeting around being able to provide more targeted, intensive, and ongoing supports to students. But there's a lot that's happening outside of the building that impacts them as well. And so working with our partners locally to think about housing, to think about healthcare, to think about access to mental health in addition to physical health as well is really key to holistically making sure that our students have what they need to be able to walk into a building and focus on what we think their job is during the day, which is to learn and grow. But that can't happen if all of those other things aren't met. And I think Cincinnati is already doing a good job of finding a comprehensive and holistic approach to that. We just need to keep building it out.
Yes, you can come up to the mic.
Thank you.
Being a youth coach and a youth advocate and just working around kids, I think that some of them just, when you see the fights and you see the disruptive behavior, you know that's some social emotional learning. It's been my experience when I teach them, when I talk to them, is that they don't have the language for what they're experiencing, and then they don't have the scripts to be able to navigate the conflict with their peers. And so I don't know what to do as a whole. I can only suggest that I visited several in-school suspensions when the kids are just sitting there. That's an opportunity for them to get some social emotional curriculum, maybe prior to returning after suspensions, to get some type of conflict resolution. And they also have the bystander training for youth that teaches them the language on how to escape certain fighting situations or situation with peers when they feel stressed. I personally just believe that the kids don't have the language or don't have that particular tool to navigate those situations where they could still save face, make an impact, and still be socially acceptable. So that's my suggestion, is find language around empowering them to have the scripts, to have the language, so that they can kind of police each other.
Thank you. Dr. Little, just to kind of,
The only thing I appreciate that. No, you're good. I appreciate it though, officer. The only thing I would add to that is that adults need it too. And that, if we can do both of those
adults
things,
need it too.
Well, and quickly to that point, Member Morosky, when we think about SEL, restorative practices, trauma-informed care in particular, those do not work if the adult isn't also in a place to help students through that process. So this is really a sort of two-generation or two-layer effort.
So I was just going to say, Dr. Little, thank you for the presentation. And of course, talking about moving forward, I took two things. Definitely improving the mental health first aid. I think that's going to be key, and also really helping us and our students. And then two, the restorative practices. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what maybe the plan might be moving forward in terms of the restorative practice? Because I know we've been talking about that as a district. Yes, a long time. And so I feel like I just need a little bit of some clarity on that.
Absolutely. It's a similar answer to mental health first aid, and where we want to really make sure that we've got a huge foundation in the district of people who can provide training and support to all of our educators in CPS. Part of it starts, though, with making sure we know what restorative practices is and what it isn't. And so there is some language setting throughout the district and community that's going to need to take place to make sure that this is not an excuse or absence of consequences. It's really about responsibility taking and building both language and capacity to think through different choices in the future. But there are specific routines and protocols and practices that go into play when we think of either restorative practices or restorative discipline. And so we've got to really roll out comprehensive training across the board. And what we also want to think about there is not just within the confines of CPS proper, but throughout Cincinnati, working with partners who are doing after-school programs or summer programs or supporting our students to make sure that that context is set wherever our students may be.
Great, thank you. Board Member Jones?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the district did, I don't know whether participate, I know it wasn't integrated across the entire district, but there was an initiative to learn about restorative practices. And, oh God, Dr. Robert Shapiro was the person who headed, there was a group, and I can't think of the name, and it was based there.
Joining Forces for Children.
Joining Forces for Children. Thank you. But it might be worthwhile just to see kind of where things left off with that, you know, where that is. So Mr. Morosky may know about that.
Yes, feel free.
Thank you. I'm very privileged to work with them in my real job and have for some time. They're the best. But related to this job and also significant to your comments, so at the Cincinnati Rec Commission, where my colleagues have graciously appointed me for a couple years to serve as our liaison, we've been working with Joining Forces for Children at the CRC to do the same thing, because a lot of these kids, of course, and the cops know this better than anybody, are spending their time, if they're not with us, they're hanging out at the CRC. And a lot of the staff at the CRC, they're woefully underpaid. I'll go off on a rant, I'll stop. But they're woefully underpaid for what they do. They certainly aren't being trained in trauma-informed care or, you know, education for kids. And so we did a pilot, or they did a pilot, CRC did a couple summers ago, and went really well. But Joining Forces was looking to do that again. But the problem is, at least on that end, now I'm just dreaming big. It'd be nice if all library staff, all CRC staff, every cop, firefighter, CPS, et cetera, so we all had this same training, to your point, because it's not going to, we didn't create these issues. We're not going to solve them all. So, but anyway, that training is really good. And any way we could, and I'll stop, but any way we could support, I guess, not that we got a bunch of money flowing out our ears, but, you know, support these initiatives across, or at least get behind them, would be awesome.
Well, I have one more question for Dr. Little, and this is pertaining to bullying. I know that I've gotten or received a lot of emails from family members regarding this topic. And my question, in your presentation, you talked about how after the first 24 hours, the investigation starts. But what is the process of when the particular family member or student, when do they hear back, and how do they hear back? Are they sent a letter? Are they sent an email? Does it go through the principal? What's the process? And I know that Superintendent Wright was able to, in one of our last board meetings, kind of walk through how to report bullying, to get to that bully button on the website, to make sure that people were aware. Because I've found from lots of family members that they weren't aware, even though it's there. And I think sometimes we just have to kind of talk people through how to get to those particular things.
Yeah, to start there, the bully button is one of the left-hand little icons on the main homepage. You can, of course, Google search it. It is something that, through work that counselors and teams do through advising or other things, to make sure that students know about as well. Once the report is made, to get to the process part of the question, that pings the principal. So you have to select a school when you're filling out the form, and that sends something directly to the principal to initiate the investigation. There is a way, and this is actually on the slide as part of the header language, if for some reason somebody doesn't want the principal to know, we encourage them then instead to call customer care so we can fill out a form without it sending a ping and figure out what that concern may be. That's really rare, though. Most of the time, folks are filling it out indicating their school, and it goes directly to the principal, who then pulls the necessary parties together to figure out what's going on and decide if that's going to be a confirmed case of bullying or not. The communication with the families really rests with the school in those instances. In the more rare cases where it rises to the level of the district team, we certainly will reach out and talk to families along the way. But the closing the loop really starts and ends in most cases at the school level.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, we're going to move on to other business. I know that I have two topics for other business. I don't know if my colleagues have anything. I'm going to defer to them first. Board Member Jones, do you have anything for other business? Board Member Morosky? Okay, so two things came up in the community for me. First thing, phone bag locks, and possibly discussing whether this district might think about possibly looking into that for our students when they are attending schools. Since
What?
I'm going to get there.
Oh,
I'm getting there.
You said it and I missed it. Sorry.
Phone bag locks. So what it is students who have phones, so that they're not on their phones and not having any issues with social media or disruptions to the class, they come into school, they put their phone into this bag that locks for the whole day. They can't utilize it. And then once it's the end of the day at 2:30, 3:30, whatever time school is let out, it unlocks. I was just curious to see or hear your thoughts of my colleagues of what you thought about that. If you've ever heard of it, would it be something of interest? I just know that we have an increased level of fights stemming from conversations on phones and things that are happening during school because kids are on their phones, even though they're supposed to be off their phones, etc. You can go first. Yeah.
Thank you, Member Weinberg. I have not heard of that. My initial opinion is I don't like the idea, solely because these things are so different now. A lot of our families communicate with their kids solely through this. If there was something that were to happen, hopefully not. Oftentimes the phone is a way, kids can let, a family member or police or whoever knows something bad's going on. I know when we redid the cell phone policy, we actually were pretty intentional about making it so that students could have them. Now that could be, we could all feel differently now, you know what I mean? The board could feel differently. So my first blush, obviously I don't want the kids messing around on it. And to your point about the discipline, over 90% of our discipline infractions began on social media. So, but that's going to happen anyway, not to be cynical,
Right.
But I think that would probably happen anyhow. So that's just my initial guess. Obviously I don't want them on their phone in school, but I just think I don't know. I think it could be used for good, and that some families actually rely on it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the program, so I can't say one way or the other. I'm old school, and so I have issues with phones in school. However, I've come to understand that they are valuable in terms of helping, students learn in the learning environment. So I've gotten comfortable with that fact. I think it ties all to everything that we're talking about, the relationship and how we help kids cope and the family environment and all of that. So this is not an easy, the phone situation is not an easy one to resolve. I mean, I'd be willing, I would like to hear more about the program just to hear, but don't have an opinion one way or the other.
Okay. Dr. Little, have anything to say?
I think it is something that we will look into. This probably first popped on the radar 8 to 9 months ago, sort of in districts across the country. I think there's some local, Southern Ohio districts that are starting to look at it right now. I know of one in the context where I came from that's piloting it this year. So I think there's a lot to learn about what this may look like.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I just was curious and wanted a little bit of dialogue between you all. Then my last, I wanted to talk regarding lockdown drills. And I know in other districts here in Cincinnati, they have their buildings labeled outside of the windows with specific room numbers and doors. Is this district possibly looking into that, especially as, if we're having anything serious that happens and someone arrives on scene, that they know exactly where they're supposed to be going? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we're in those conversations right now about thinking of exterior door labels. When CPD or other law enforcement has to respond, our terminology for a building is not necessarily the same as theirs. Right. So we definitely see the benefit of having clearly labeled exterior doors. I don't think at this point we would necessarily go to window labels, though we have heard about that in other contexts, but really making sure entrance and exits are clearly labeled, especially for our larger buildings that have multiple wings.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, Rob, we are at the point. Do we have any hearing of the public? No one wants to talk to us, the 6 people that are out there? No one? Okay. Well, since we don't have any hearing of the Oh, do you have a question, Lieutenant? All right, come on up.
Phone thing.
Okay.
Just a phone thing. I do agree that sometimes it can be very useful throughout the day. I do, however, think that we should look into usage, because if there's all these studies that show how a child's brain develops and they can become addicted, these children are literally addicted to their phones, and how that impacts learning. And if we're not going to take phones, then as a parent whose child went to CPS but then changed schools, what do you then do with their attention in the curriculum? Because then that's where you have to merge the gap. So that's just my area of concern with
Good
the
points.
phones.
Good points. Well, thank you. Thank you.
But we could always ban TikTok.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We have no other business, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you so much.